Welcome to AI Meets API, the podcast where we explore the powerful intersection of artificial intelligence and API-driven integration. I'm Kimberly, and today we bring you an insightful discussion on how AI is revolutionizing API-led integration. Hosting today's episode is Ajay Konda, CGO and co-founder of ProwessSoft Software Services, and joining us as an esteemed guest is Jake Morgan, Senior Director of Solution Engineering and Financial Services at Salesforce. With over 12 years of experience, Jake brings deep insight into our finance, integration, and AI-driven automation. Let's dive right in. Ajay, over to you.
Thank you, Kimberly. Jake, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
That's quite an introduction. We're thrilled to have you. And before we get started, I want to share a few things I learned about you from some of your colleagues, right?
Oh, this will be interesting.
Uh, you are known to be highly vocal, incredibly strategic in your viewpoints. Always look at challenges through strategic lens rather than purely tactical one. One of the philosophies you always strongly tell your team is that start focus on the problem statement rather than product side of it. So you are a big advocate of selling the problem, not the product. And you have been very curious person all along, and you are big into the art of selling. How to best sell technology through the success stories and problem solving. So overall, it sounds like you are truly a problem first mindset in the world of AI and integration. Would you say this philosophy has changed your career or approach to the technology? How do you say it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty good description, I would say. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's what happens a lot of times is we miss a lot of opportunities because we get so wrapped around the axle of, we've got this hammer and we're trying to find all the nails and we're actually making nails out of things that should really be screws or, other types of fastening devices. And so we miss a lot of great opportunities to kind of rethink and rebalance, the approach. So a lot of what, and one of the reasons why I love about MuleSoft in the early days is we all focused on the outcome, right? We were like, hey, let's work with you as a customer. And what are you trying to achieve? And we play art of the possible, right? So a lot of times our customers don't know what they don't know, or, a lot of times they're in the trenches and they just, see that one tree and not necessarily the full forest. So that's what a lot of our disciplinary aspect is hey, there's some art of the possible we can do here. I used to have this story that I'd use bowling as a good example of and people think, well, how does APIs and bowling mix, right? And the whole story arc would really prove that out. And the whole point of that is that you got to kind of reimagine the world. And that's one of the things that you see in AI right now is that we're trying to shoehorn AI versus saying, those are into human processes versus thinking about what is the real true problem we're trying to solve. And let's reimagine that as if we started day one with AI and then inject human in those processes versus the other way around where we've designed the process with humans and now we're trying to figure out where to put AI. So that's kind of the approach and kind of the thinking that I do. At one point in time, I was a product manager and that was what I was trained to do. Every single day I woke up, my job was, if I had to start a new company from scratch doing what I do, is this what I would produce? Because architectures change, all that. So the whole thing was stop thinking about the boat anchors that you have, but think about really where you need to go today, and then figure out how do you bridge those two.
Okay, that's really good way to look at the problems. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I can totally understand. That will give us a better insight into which parts of the existing things you can bring into the new architecture than trying to re-architect the old things into the new way. You have been working across various IT roles in various industries, but can you share us something about your career journey, how you got into the integration and AI driven automation?
Yeah. So right out of college, I worked for four of the original Java members. When they left Sun Microsystems after Java 1.0 was released, they created a company called Marimba. and we did software distribution over insecure and unreliable networks. And I was professional services out of the New York City office. So I was going around the country, implementing this product, and a lot of times writing custom code for it, because again, it was an evolving product, and we'd have to meet in, with our customers. And so that was a lot of IT operations, because at this point, you think about, year 2000, there was a lot of laptops being purchased by companies, and they were distributed. The networks themselves weren't all that fast, right? Even just even Goldman Sachs back in those days, it was 100 megabit, Ethernet, and that was it. And you had a lot of laptops on it. So how do you be as efficient and effective with updating the software on those machines and inventory them as well, because you have license compliances? So that's where I started, and I had to work with all these major IT organizations. A lot of them were global companies like Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley. And so you get introduced to a lot of challenges. And what was cool too at the same time, especially if you're in the financial services world, working with Goldman Sachs, there was one project that I actually accessed two cutting edge technologies through them. One was global load balancers. So it was the first time anybody had ever thought about injecting routes right into the switches. So we got to work with those. And then Active Directory. Before even Active Directory was out, I actually had access to the code to help integrate our product into Active Directory globally at Goldman Sachs. And Goldman Sachs at that time had actually hired the product manager over Active Directory from Microsoft to implement Active Directory at Goldman. So that's the kind of stuff that was kind of cool, and seeing some of that cutting edge. And then, later I was in the data center and at Verizon in Tampa, Florida. And I was there for several years, and we were implementing the same product, but on their server side with all their Unix environment, doing inventory there and software distribution. So then you get to see a different aspect of IT operations, which is a lot tighter and a lot more change control processes in place. Sometimes when you want to do a change, you can't do it immediately. It's got to be a week, type thing. And then, of course, after that, everybody was pushing for faster, agile capabilities of doing deployments. And then eventually I got to BMC Software, and that's, Irma got acquired by BMC Software. We're at that point in time, what they were looking to do was how do we help CIOs get out of their own way? And because at that point, you remember, you're talking 2000 to 2005, post.com, and CIOs were getting their teeth kicked in. I mean, it was terrible. They were often reporting to the CFO or the COO, never the CEO at that point in time, and they were definitely not being invited to the boardroom. And they were trying to get themselves, respectable, get up into that, being at least invited to the boardroom. And so BMC came up with this concept of business service management, which was based on ITIL. And ITIL came out of the UK way back in 1980, the first version. It was really kind of this framework on how to do change management, how do you do incident and problem and whatnot. And so BMC took that messaging, wrapped it up into a nice, beautiful playbook, maturity curves and all, and then gave it to the CIOs and said, hey, this is how you're going to get, how to earn your way to the board. And the CIOs read it. It's vendor agnostic, but it was resonated greatly, and to the point where a lot of them would go to the board and then have a conversation about BSM. And then the board members would say, well, who are you working with on this? And of course they would say, I'm working with BMC Software. So that was a kind of our door to even a conversation in these boardrooms. So that came about. And then over a period of time, the landscape changed in IT, which, AWS came out with their whole cloud infrastructure. People were playing with it. Developers mostly were playing with it. Nobody was really doing anything production yet and any kind of mass. But what would happen is the CIO said, hey, we want that, but we want it in our data center. So at BMC, that's when we went down this path, and we acquired server management, storage management. We acquired an integration/orchestration product, database management, all these things that had to fully manage a data center so that they could basically reproduce AWS inside their data center. And we did partnerships with VMware and EMC and Cisco. And we were actually at one point in the head of their Cisco device, their server management, their data center in a box concept. We were in the head unit managing all the different components. Well, along that line, I was tapped to be the product manager over the orchestration integration engine for all that. And of course, that was fun. I mean, you were in the heart and center of everything. Learned a lot of lessons. And then I had a good friend of mine that I was working with her at BMC, ends up leaving BMC and joining MuleSoft. And he's like, this is a place, because I was actually, as a product manager, I was actually using MuleSoft as my model on work. Remember, I told you if I woke up every day, I was using that. And then I said, hey, yeah, this is the direction we need to go. And I was using MuleSoft as that model to show and demonstrate, here's where we're at with our product. This is really where we need to go. Let's figure out how do we chart that path, and we'll get funding for it. So anyways, I jumped over to MuleSoft as one of the early, kind of like, I would say, the end of chapter 1, beginning of chapter 2 of the story of MuleSoft.
So I hear that you are one of the first 10 technical folks or something
Yeah.
MuleSoft had.
Yeah. I was like the 6th SE in the company at that time. Yeah.
That's great.
Yep.
So once you join the MuleSoft, right? So you might have worked with so many customers on the API side, right? Can you share us some customer success story where they got a significant business benefits using the API-led architecture?
Yeah, the early days was fun because, it was part of it was evangelizing, and the other part of it was realization of what we were doing. And the beauty of those early days is that whatever we evangelized, within 6 months, we had it in the product, and our customers relied on that. So we were very tight with messaging. We kind of looked at it as kind of a 3-tiered thing. We would talk about the art of the possible, which is stuff that was like going to be like a year out, things that we were thinking about that would take a little while for us to get into the product. And then we had this kind of next stage was the kind of the little futuristics, a little bit, 6 months, 6 to 8 months out. And then we had what's reality today. And so API led was a big one because, you got to think about when I joined MuleSoft, it was very much focused on just purely integration using the integration patterns book that's been out since like 2003, right? So it was very much chasing after those things. SOA was already out for several years, and we were looking at, we were a better mousetrap. Fundamentally, we were an ESB, but how can we like really significantly change the landscape? And what's that next generation? What's the and aspect of it? And that's where API led came in about, was really about APIs. So, the other aspect to this whole story with APIs, and I'm just kind of giving you the background context of the whys. Part of the APIs was that it's vendor agnostic, right? So when we talk about API led and contracts and all that, it's very much vendor agnostic. But our differentiation is that we were going to be able to manage the API and also implement the API, and you could do both of those in any combination you want, cloud and on-prem, and the hybrid of the two. So it could be either or. So when we started evangelizing, we were talking to the likes of Coca-Cola, the Coca-Cola company right here in Atlanta, the Coca-Cola Enterprise, the whole suite of Coke entities. And then we went to Anheuser-Busch, and we had the conversation there, and ExxonMobil. And they're all like, we love it. And then it's like, look, we're like our organization has been around for a long time. We get it that you're going to have technology that's going to do some great things, but we also need help for the people and process side. So then at that point in time, we end up deciding like, hey, what can we do to establish kind of like not a center for excellence, because that was kind of a heavy-handed thing. We wanted really kind of for enablement. How do you make a community, including a federal, because these are big companies, they're global. So how do you end up including everybody, even in other countries? So that's where we came up with the CFRE, the Center for Enablement. And then we combined those two in the story. So now we had this people, process, and technology conversation with the likes of Coca-Cola, with Anheuser-Busch, and we demonstrated it. Like this is the concept. We did a small little POC because, again, nobody's really done this, pull it all together, right? At this point, developers are creating APIs for mobile or tablets or even websites, but nobody's really thinking about it in a holistic view of the enterprise. How do you unlock the enterprise as a whole? These APIs themselves represent how every company does business, right? So you can go in there and you can look at them and say, oh, well, this is what a customer looks like, and this is what processes are available, and et cetera, right? And that's what those APIs were doing. So it becomes almost like their platform that they were creating. And of course, they had all sorts of other subsystems. So we brought it together. I'll give you one with Anheuser-Busch. And by the way, this story just keeps replicating. I mean, you can name any of our customers, and this is pretty much the same pattern that still lives today. So the whole thing with Anheuser-Busch was that we wanted to do this POC, very small one. It was a beer garden app. So that what they did is, they have a beer garden there in St. Louis. And when they have visitors come, they want to have them use the app. And then when any beer that they choose, they want to pair it with some kind of food, right? So that they, you as, enjoy a full meal. So that was the concept. They had hired a third party for this to build the actual mobile app. And then it was up to us to manage the API side of things. So what we did is we said, hey, this third party company, here's the RAML spec. Because remember, RAML, MuleSoft had released RAML early on, which nobody had done before. They tried with like Waddles at Sun, but it never took off. It was taking WSDLs and shoehorning them, but there was nothing clean. So that's what we did is we came up with RAML. So we taught the third party mobile company, say, hey, here's what RAML looks like. Here's how you use it. You go to define your API that you want to consume with your mobile app, and you can define it. You mock it up and whatnot. Here it is. Here's the tool. So independently of us, doing all the integrations and pulling everything into an API, they were actually creating what we would call today their experience API, and they did that, in parallel to what we were doing. And the beauty of that is that when they came back, they could completely shortcut their old process with getting approvals. They had like one meeting with the executives that took like 45 minutes because while they were showing the executives this mobile app and all the different feature functionalities, the executives could then have a conversation with them about, no, we need to change this, change that. And a guy in the corner was actually making those changes in the RAML within the UI and publishing them. So they were just doing all the iterations right there in that 45-minute conversation. And then by the time they walked out, they had the approval. Well, that was the API spec that they gave us and said, now you guys need to implement this. And then we went from the top down, right? We took that spec that they graded because that's the information they need. Because again, any good UI starts with what's the business reasons for the data that you need to capture or show, right? And that's what they did. And then they gave that spec to us, and then we just implemented the process API or the experience API itself, and then the process and the system API. And we did all this in a week. And normally this would be a month POC because of all the crazy iteration stuff that they would have to coordinate amongst the third party and the internal, and then actually implement stuff. And we were able to do it all in 1 week, and they're like, holy smokes, this changes the landscape. And then we just started talking about, imagine doing all that, what you would normally take in a month to do what we accomplished in a week. Imagine doing that across all your enterprise.
That will be big.
Yeah, and then that resonated with Coca-Cola, same thing.
So which year was this? 2006, 7?
No, this was late 2014, early 15 when all this was happening. 14, yeah, because before that we were just selling ESBs. We weren't doing anything. You could implement APIs in Mule, but you had to write them all.
Okay, got it. Yeah, early versions of this one. A lot of these stories are very interesting, and I'm part of some of those journeys, and I could have seen live.
Yeah,
those magic. So these are more like, is it like MuleSoft early is more like a consumer goods or manufacturing, and retail side is more, and then moved into the financial sector? Like I know that you lead the financial services for the MuleSoft right now. So how does how your transition went into the financial services, and what did you learn differently from financial services versus other domains you supported?
Yeah, so I mean, those early days, I supported all the industries. Healthcare, it's kind of fun, right? Because in the morning you were doing healthcare, maybe some oil and gas, energy, and then financial services, some bank or some financial service entity, and then the afternoon you might have retail, and manufacturing. So you did a little bit of everything, and that was every day, right? 5 days a week, and then eventually we as we verticalized, as time went on, we got acquired by Salesforce. We verticalized. Then we kind of became more specialist. And then, I was there for a while. I was overseeing RCG and SMB and financial services. So eventually, as time going on, then I got assigned to financial services. And, the interesting thing, what I like about financial services is that you have this wide range of, customer base within it, right? You've got the Goldman Sachs of the world, the Capital Ones of the world, deep pockets, very much proud of being kind of like build everything. So they're also cutting edge, right? Anything that's new, they're already playing with before the rest of the market catches up, because they have the ability, right? They have the resources to do it. So when it comes to like integration and APIs, a lot of that stuff they've already done. So the conversations that we have is very much coexisting. It's like, hey, we know that the business has got certain things that they want to try to accomplish, and they needed to accomplish it yesterday. So we've actually, at the end of the day, you're going to design even your own integration. If you're going to build it, it's going to look just like MuleSoft. The difference is that you offload that work to us and then supporting, and you guys can implement it, or partners can, like yourselves, can implement this. But at the end of the day, we're all going to come up with pretty much the same architectures. The major difference is that we actually have visibility across 4,000 customers on how they're doing their integrations and the problems that they're seeing and the evolution of the problems that they're seeing. And so we have that expertise. You guys are saying the same thing, right? And you bring that expertise into the fold. So, but then you got the other side, which are, the small credit unions that don't really have IT, right? They might have 10. That's it. So, and those 10 people are having to be masters of 20, 25 different applications. So how do you kind of help them, help themselves and whatnot? So on that spectrum, they haven't really adopted a true like API led, and maybe they don't need to, right? Maybe it's really their environment is so simple. They got, maybe a dozen different systems that they just have to stitch together. And so that's kind of the beauty of everything in between, is you got real complex things that the bigger companies and banks are trying to do. And then you got the simplistic things that the smaller ones are trying to do.
That sounds great. Thanks, Jack. Yeah, definitely. Financial services is, I feel, one of the complex and also need a lot of boundaries to be defined compared to the freedom you have in the non-regulated industries.
And that can be a challenge, and sometimes when you're trying to do innovation, by the way,
Yeah.
is the regulation side of things, to keep everybody satisfied, legal, for the agencies themselves and the business.
AIs and AI and APIs are evolving rapidly. What are some of the trends and innovations you are seeing in this space that businesses should watch for, especially in terms of the AI and API together?
Right now, everybody's trying to figure it out. I mean, let's just level set that. I know early on there was a lot of anxiety in certain environments where like, oh man, we're behind. Well, I don't think so. I think everybody's pretty much at the same spot. They're trying to figure out what to do with it.
Wild West.
Yeah, it's like the early days of the internet, right? It's like, if you remember, if you're anybody that grew up before the internet happened, once you got a taste of it, you're like, hey, there's something here.
Mm-hmm.
But you got to remember, back in those early days, there was no web browser yet. It was all text, right? And it's like, oh, this is really powerful because I can ask any kind of question and there's some kind of context that I can get additional information. I mean, the first time I got on the internet was 1994. And it was, literally I was doing a report on robotics. Mm-hmm. And I grew up in a little small town in Iowa, which my library didn't have anything about robotics. It was like an encyclopedia that you pull off the shelf, and it had 2 pages about robotics. And that's it. Mm-hmm. And so, we did a long distance, modem call and got into a pool and did a query, and it got 100 pages of content, which I thought was awesome. But again, it was like one of those things that there's something here. It's got to be more than just reading a bunch of articles, but nobody knew it, and that's where the .com craze came in, right? Is everybody's like, oh, we got to capitalize it because there's something there, just not sure what. And it feels like that, and so everybody should just hey, you got to rethink about things and how the AI is involved in these processes, because sometimes it's just pretty much a summarization, right? The contextual side of things, and then there's the desire to get to the actual autonomous side, the automation where it's kind of lights out, it makes its own decisions or suggestions and executes upon them. And there's this whole maturity curve. But at the end of the day, it's all going to take data, and all that data has got to be exposed and available, and that's pretty much through an API of some sort.
Yes. Are there anything like API practitioners across the world? Are there so many of the people have been working on this space? Anything they can adopt quickly to showcase the value of their current API landscape for using AI?
Yeah, well, yeah, there's lots of different things right now. It's I don't know if anybody's used Anthropic's Claude, but it's pretty powerful. You can describe, like, for instance, a couple weeks ago, I was needing to produce just kind of an example of an API. So I pulled out Claude and just said, hey, design me an API that represents underwriting in insurance. and it spit it out, right? In OAS 3.1. And then I turned around and said, hey, implement that API in MuleSoft. And boom, it implemented in MuleSoft. I think that those are some powerful things. Now, I mean, you have to go through it and check it, but man, does it get you there a lot faster, right? I mean, it's like one of those things, especially if you're trying to do proof of concepts or doing mocking of some sort. It's fabulous for that, because you can follow up and say, hey, put mock data in this thing. And then it'll even prompt you. A lot of times it'll prompt you, say, well, what's the size of the data set you want us to produce? And it'll produce it. In fact, it'll even create the database scripts and, to insert all the data in there for you. So, I mean, it does a lot of great things. And so I think there is some of that in the practitioner aspect that you can use to go faster. The other aspect of it is, in this, where we're really kind of looking at the innovation around AI, is how do you adopt AI into API management? So, for instance, is it possible to create an agent that's dynamically creating its own policies? Or maybe you have a library of policies that's available to it, that as information is going across it, it's dynamically pulling those policies to consume, and letting people know, or other systems know, that this is what it's doing, and make decisions. So there's all sorts of possibilities. I mean, there's possibilities of, instead of having real contracts, we kind of adopt things like GraphQL, that in turn the agent itself understands those queries, and then dynamically behind the scenes leverages existing APIs to pull all that information together, versus kind of what you've seen in the past, where it's been more of you have to have this kind of system in place to be able to do the translations, et cetera, where the agent itself knows security context, is aware. It could even flag you and say, hey, there's an opportunity, there's a portion of this API you could improve upon, right? So it's self-aware, and it just says, hey, you could improve this API based on the way it's being used, and then gives you recommendations. And, it could go through a change process. You can loop all this stuff into a change process, so you can keep it all in this nice continuous loop, so you're aware of the changes, or even the suggestions that it's providing. So there's a lot of arts possible with where AI can play in API.
Yeah, quite good practical use cases, Jake. Especially, initial development, POCs, and those type of things could be much faster. And the other one is dynamically able to use APIs more effectively and by the front end applications. Yeah, definitely, those are some of the things we are also seeing it.
And I think it'll also do. It's kind of funny, because we historically, when you want to check something statically, like lint activities, you go way back in your C days, where you have a lint post processes. You have standards that you've created, or best practices, or look for memory leaks, etc. And of course, you can pull lint into any kind of double checking. And we did this a long time ago in MuleSoft, where we created this lint project that executed against the MuleSoft projects, looking for passwords that are being set inside the applications versus being extracted out and put in a configuration file and encrypted, or IP addresses were being set statically versus using DNS. All those kind of things could happen. Now imagine what you can do with an agent that has a lot more wider knowledge around operations, IT operations and operations around an API or deployment. And so now it can look at your code before you publish it and look for things much more broader than what we historically have allowed it to, or allow these activities in your DevOps process.
Definitely.
Yep.
Speaking of these challenges, right? AI and API has a lot of potential, and we have so many use cases, but biggest hurdle for businesses is adoption.
Mm-hmm.
What would you advise for enterprises to have more adoption, or challenges of the adoption? How can they solve it?
Yeah. So one thing is that we've got to come to terms that not everything should be an API. So that's part of the problem with adoption, because the metrics we typically look for in adoption is we produce an API and nobody's using it.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things we've got to do, and that's what early days, I think it was part of the art that was lost from the early days, just because of the explosion of everything, is the fact is that not everything should be an API. If the goal is to have reusability, then you should probably early on find use cases that demand having an API to be created that will be used 3 or 4 times, right? Versus just a one-off. So I think that's part of it, because then when you go through the cycle of looking and analyzing, you're like, oh, hey, I didn't get really a lot of reusability here, or anybody's using it. But that was part of the talk track too, is that you deprecate some of these things, that you either merge those features in with another API, or you just deprecate it and get it out, period. Nobody's using it. The other part of it is kind of really the people process side of things. You got to have a process in place that kind of evangelizes the power of the API internally, right? Sometimes we take for granted that, that APIs are not necessarily a thing for everybody. We eat and breathe it every day, but not necessarily these enterprises, especially if you go out too far out beyond just the center, of IT. So you really got to kind of educate that and put a marketing play internally for that. And that's kind of what the C4E was, trying to do too, is how do you evangelize, leveraging these APIs. The other piece of it is having a place to go. Once you actually educate that, hey, we got all these APIs, and the question is, where do I go to find them? And then, like we have Exchange and MuleSoft, and really at the end of the day, that from a vendor agnostic perspective, you just want one place that everybody goes to say, hey, what capabilities are out there that I can consume? Look at it, and if there's some enhancements, you got to have a mechanism to be able to request, enhancements to that API and request to access it, whether it's just to test and play with or to actually use it in production. So there is some of that efforts that's got to happen, and part of it too is that when you evangelize it, you got to look at the impact, right? You got to have those stories, just like we were talking about, like what customers have been adopting, the API LEDs or MuleSoft, and they're seeing these impacts. It's crazy. I mean, even at ExxonMobil, for the very first time, before we got involved, the way that it worked was that wherever they were exploring oil, whatever came up out of the ground, that's actually what they produced. Mm-hmm. And part of it is because there was no bridging of the information across from the business and the actual production side or the exploration. So what we ended up doing is we actually integrated these two halves through APIs, so that the very first time the business of ExxonMobil could then now say, hey, this is the type of oil that we really ultimately need, because this is what we want to produce. Isn't that crazy? I mean,
that's
it's crazy that it took that long, but it was all through APIs that did it.
Yeah, we feel like they might have already have all that access.
Yeah, because part of it too is the APIs themselves also cross boundaries of, internal groups, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's politics that get in the way for that information to be shared. APIs kind of releases that, because one of the things you can do is you can always ask, why isn't this API available?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, goes back to my whys. I always love to know the whys behind stuff, because I think that's fundamentally, a lot of times we shortcut everything and just kind of go right after it, but we don't really understand fundamentally as what is causing the issue. Why is it causing it? Is it because nobody wants to do it, or is it just politics, people getting in the way? Mm-hmm. Is there a technological issue? Because there are certain systems we get, or customers that have systems that they don't have APIs. It's literally the only way you can get access to the information is through a screen scrape.
Mm-hmm. Yep, definitely.
So that's you just got to kind of root that at whys, and then people say, oh yeah, okay, makes sense.
Yep, absolutely, Jake, you are right on that. But when it comes to this adoption, like what kind of KPIs usually you like to see enterprises adopt for the APIs, and also how can we now embed the AI into it? How does these KPIs will change?
Yeah. So what we like to do is start out small, right? We want to be able to come into kind of we want to see the project backlog typically of what an enterprise has. And the reason behind that is because we want to look at integration points. If you start back, it's like, hey, what's your outcome and what data do you need for that outcome? And then where's the data reside in the enterprise, and how easy is it to get access to that data? And how often do you need that data to support that business process? So you kind of walk into the landscape of where all the APIs are that are needed to be created. And then you do it again with another line of business or another business process, and you try to find all the overlaps, because that's where you start getting the reusability. So when you start out that way, you're going to end up having some very clear defined APIs that you want to create. And then one of the metrics you want to look at is, well, how many did we create initially in the first couple of projects? And then how often are they being used? because that's really kind of the usability aspect of it. You want to look at those metrics. Then from there, you want to look at how fast are you growing those APIs? How many are you adding on, or you're changing the existing APIs? Because that's another metric. Because what that's showing is there's consumption of those APIs, and there's also growth of using APIs overall. So you get this more of adoption because we're creating net new APIs on top of it. And so you just keep doing that, and eventually you will. Every company does. We'll end up hitting like a kind of like a lull where. Because you think about it, I mean, you're going after high value things typically, and maybe some low hanging fruit. That's one thing I caution is the low hanging fruit is great for the early days to get the momentum going, but it's not sustainable because you still have to show ROI. And that's where you have to find these bigger projects and these bigger things that have a bigger ROI to mix in with the low hanging fruit. Otherwise, you're pretty much going to starve yourself, And so that's where this balanced approach is. And that's why we want to look at the project backlog, because you want to stagger these things. Because sometimes what you do is you find out that there's some massive things that are happening in Project 5, but Project 5 is slated to take a long time to do. And that's why one of the reasons why they push it off, because of resources. Well, guess what? There's probably a good third of the integrations required in Project 5 we could actually pull forward into Project 1 through 4. And therefore 5 can actually get started earlier. Right? Because again, it's all about resource management. So if we can do these things early on, we get the reusability, we can actually go much faster and condense our project timelines. Mm-hmm. That's also where AI comes into play. Mm-hmm. So AI has the ability to latch onto these APIs that we're already creating for our standard business processes. And now we have the ability to expose those as capabilities to AI, to these agents. That's where the agentic comes into play, or even gathering up additional information or doing the contextual stuff where we can get information out of the system in the context of you. And then now I want you to have have the agents formulate those summaries of that information in a context that's for you as Ajay. In that aspect. So that's kind of how that all is going to happen, right? Is it's going to end up having this, the more APIs we have, the more intelligence we have the capability of tapping into, just because we have more of the processes, more of the business intelligence exposed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good way to see it. And it gives you a lot more flexibility, but especially I have experienced firsthand the reusability aspect of it. What you just mentioned about the more and more projects start, and if we plan it strategically, there is a lot of reusability in the later stages of the projects, and it reduces the adoption cycle, and also the project delivery cycles are much shorter for the newer projects. We talked so much about the AI and APIs. Definitely it plays a critical role. But one of the other things that is going across the organizations we are seeing is application rationalization. So companies are cutting down the number of applications they are using significantly. What do you feel integration role to fast track this application rationalization? Are there any active dialogues or things going on where you are also seeing this trend?
It's definitely happening. I think part of it is the legacy modernization play in itself, right? Is that anytime we have any kind of change in technology that is fairly well adopted, we start seeing a major shift of getting away from legacy into something new. MuleSoft has capitalized on that for several years with legacy modernization. For the longest time, majority of our use cases came from that segment. That's like mainframes, and how do you get more value out of your mainframe access? Create APIs out in front of it, right? That becomes the facade in front of those mainframes to get that data in and out, and then we unlock it, right? We're unlocking the data. So AS400 is very similar in nature. We also, even older applications that are out there, maybe homegrown or off the shelf. Not so much in the financial services when it comes to old legacy, because there's regulatory things about keeping up on the latest versions. But in a lot of other industries, they'll have applications that even the software vendor doesn't exist anymore, but they still continue to use it, right? How do you keep that going on? Well, that's the best thing to do is put an API out in front of it, because that API is in your full control and you define it. You're not bound to how that old application defined the data or the access now, right? You can take that same concept across all your different applications. Now, with going into more modern adoption, more and more people are, over the last several years have gone to SaaS applications. There's a big movement that direction, but you still have a lot of times you still want to have cloud to cloud because you're having multiple clouds. But you also have certain cloud vendors that are also expanding their offerings so that they're taking on, like CRM or their ITSM or other things that are part of their solution now. So it lessens the number of applications that you ultimately need to have from any one given vendor, down to more or less a platform that's already kind of either natively integrated. But even if it's natively integrated, you still got to have other applications that you have in your environment, or even agents that have to still be able to attach to it to do what you're expecting those agents to do. So that's kind of where the integration and the speed up of all this is, that often we go in there with these and say, hey, if we remove this application, we migrate it to another, what all other applications are integrated in our old system? Now we have to readdress those into the new system. And so then that's a great opportunity for us to come in there and say, hey, we can do this a lot easier than what you had been in your old days, because maybe you wrote it all in custom code, right? Maybe it was in Pascal back in the day, or BASIC, and now we can move this stuff. Same way with legacy integration tools. It wasn't too terrible long ago, as part of a customer conversation, and they identified over 200 different integration tools that they were using.
Wow.
They did a lot of it. So, there was a lot of M&A over the last several years. So that's a great opportunity for us to be part of an M&A strategy, is like, hey, how do we rationalize all these different tools and get it streamlined? Because that's great for us. And what I mean us is MuleSoft and yourself.
Yeah, we are big into the legacy modernization. Yeah. That's a great insights, Jake. Before we wrap up, any final thoughts on API and AI that you like to share that we missed in this one?
I think AI is exciting. It really is. I'm studying it every day. I think everybody in the IT space needs to kind of understand it. I don't think it's ever going to go away. It's a little bit different than blockchain, right? A blockchain popped up several years ago and everybody got excited about it. But I think this has more of staying power, and because of the possibilities, even just what we have today, right? Think about it. The AI that we have today is the worst it's ever going to get. And when we wake up tomorrow, we're going to say the same thing. Today is the worst that AI is ever going to get. And it's pretty cool right now, right? Everybody's kind of playing with it. My kids are playing with it. My wife plays with it, to try to understand just even what ChatGPT has, or Claude. So it's always going to evolve. It's always going to get better. And it's really about, if you go back in history, there was always a debate between artificial intelligence versus, artificial intelligence and human augmentation, or something like that. So it was even way back in the late 40s, early 50s, and AI won out because of marketing perspective. But it was always about augmenting humans from that perspective, even way back in the 50s. But I think that's where we'll be at, because I think that's what everybody feels more comfortable with, of saying, hey, how can I leverage this? How can I get comfortable with it and where we're at? And, we'll take it from there and see where we go.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much, Jake, for sharing your expertise. And it's absolute pleasure to have you on the conversation. And you are always exciting to converse with on the technology side, and always like to see your passion and curiosity in exploring new things. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to AI Meets API. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share the episode. Until next time, keep innovating and embracing the power of AI in your integration journey. Outro, take 2. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to AI Meets API. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode. Until next time, keep innovating and embracing the power of AI in your integration journey.